So with this first 101 demo, we'll take the top-down approach where we can see a post HTTP request being made with this endpoint so that when we hit send, we can see that it returns a string saying that we have a sales order that's been created with a particular ID. So what's happening on the back ends here is a rapidly assembled process that's syncing up a sales order. And how's that happening? So we're leveraging 3 different microservices: SAP On-Prem for fulfillment, your contact customer information with Salesforce, and SAP Hana for that order being synced up to manage these APIs so that they can be leveraged through an enterprise. These system APIs that are coming into play won't be changed very frequently, but through this application, we have the build of a process API to sync that order, and leading all the way to your experience APIs to verify these orders for your internal and your external use of these on-prem and cloud-based applications for Smart Turbine. So I'll show you through the backends how this is being powered for this solution. Through the capabilities of the TIBCO Cloud hosted and managed environment, you're able to get capabilities for API specs that you can create, integrated applications that allow you to sync up these processes through your browser build to be able to create these flows and have event-based processes in play. As well as in this demo, we'll be looking at more analytics in the cloud to give you insights using exploratory analysis to look at answering those questions related to the Smart Turbine sales orders. So starting with the API specifications, we'll come into the capabilities for APIs, and under API modeling, we can quickly be able to create and look at those API specs and using those and testing against them by creating mock applications. So in this group, I've got a number of APIs. Let's take, for example, this API for contacts. So you can come in and look at being able to create those path resources for a number of different method operations, specifying the query parameters to your choosing so that you can be able to test out and provide that header or the body that you require for, let's say, like a post. If you wanted to implement that, you could be able to specify each of those and be able to test the functionalities before anything goes into production. So here, for example, we can also put in that, expected schema for the response side tied to, let's say, for these contacts, the customer name, phone number, mailing address, that would be used in the sales order. So here we can look again at those specs. You can either generate Node.js code for your implementations, create a synced up application, but let's look at that mock application I was talking about earlier. So under applications and mock apps, you can go and see this sales order mock app that I've created. Coming under here, we have that utilization of the API spec for the sales orders with that order ID that we specify. And here we can come in and hit View API to be able to test that endpoint. So in this same browser, we can put in some sample information, let's say an order ID of 10, to test that out and see that we get that 200 OK. We can see the order's been created with that particular ID. And to be able to secure this API, you can come into our governance and management under doing a publish to mastery, which is our platform within this TIBCO Cloud environment to be able to let you secure those APIs and look at things like providing registration keys for your users that come in to use the APIs on your API consumption, and as an administrator for all of the functionalities and plans and packages to use your APIs more as a product line. So here you would select that domain to be able to tie that to your mastery administrative account. So on the back ends of each of these APIs that are being used in that mock app, they're being implemented. So with Salesforce, SAP HANA, SAP Orders, these are built in our Studio environment. Studio, we have an Eclipse-based integration development environment that lets you be able to build each of the integrated processes for those system APIs. So for that fulfillment with SAP sales order. You have the palettes that allow you to be able to connect and to be able to get that information to create that sales order from fulfillment all the way through the contact and the order being created. Through this process, you have the SAP Hana purchase orders, you have this Salesforce query that's being built to integrate with that REST service for each of the invokes, as well as the BAPI document that's being connected in SAP, and you can see how that's been linked up for integration experts to come in and very quickly be able to build each of these. And then each of these 3 API applications have been just right-clicked and pushed to the cloud so that you can have that deployment and that flexibility to use each of these to interface to build that process API that we see with the sync order. So back on the cloud environment, you can see each of those APIs that have been pushed to the cloud. And now we'll come into that application of the synced up order to be able to actually test this process API that we've built. So here, when we come into the sales order application, we can come into this, what we call a flow. And you can see very easily that we have the buildup from an HTTP request. So that here, with this trigger of the HTTP message, we are utilizing to feed into 3 microservices that are being synced up. So with this, we have the SAP HANA purchase order that's taking that input, looking at that order ID to be able to map up for Salesforce contact information, then taking that information and mapping that to the name first and last and the email, for example. And then finally taking that onto the SAP RIP orders invoke to be able to map that for more detailed information tied to that order. So like the price, looking at that specific item, for example, and using that contact information and that information from SAP HANA to then deliver the creation of that sales order. Once this app has been pushed, we're able to use that, and to secure this API that we've established for our process API, we'll go through a publish to mastery. By clicking this, you can very easily go in and be able to have more governance and management of your APIs. So you would select that traffic manager domain linked to your administrative controls within APIs, which I'll show you through our mastery environment. So here under the API capabilities, you're able to come into this control center as an administrator and also into the developer portal as a user to be able to have registered keys for the applications, test out by making API calls, read on documentation tied to those APIs. So here, coming under the control center, we can come in as an administrator for this mastery portal. Under this control center, you're able to see different things like giving a plan and a package to house those APIs, those API definitions, more on registering keys for your users, and different settings associated with more management and governance of your APIs. So here, coming under API definitions, you can see those API specs and that endpoint that we're able to do a publish to mastery. So I'll show you, for example, it's easy to just make a new API definition. You can either import that JSON or the YAML file, or create this manually by just giving it a name and a version. And I've done this here for the sales order sync. This is using that endpoint from the publish to mastery feature with that synced up application that we created, the process API, which is providing this domain and traffic routing. You can see the endpoint that's being hosted and managed by that cloud application for you, and then you can specify your company.mastery.com as your public endpoint, and giving it that path parameter with the order ID that we're taking in to be able to sync up this sales process. And here you're also able to get into the designing packages and plans for these APIs so that you can set aside more things associated with the rate limits, call throttling. Here I've created a sales order package, and you can give different types of levels for those packages, for example, so that in your standard package you have different kinds of settings associated with your rate limits. For example, giving it, a certain limit of number of calls per second, establishing quotas for your day or your month or your hour, and kind of enhancing those for different types of packages that your users can come in and register for. And also with the plan designer, giving the accessibility for different applications and the endpoints, and the different method definitions, if you were to have associated with that endpoint, to be able to have all of that synced up for someone who comes in to register for a variety of plans. So looking at that aspect of the product line for your APIs and being able to list these packages then on AWS so that you could link this up with your associated credentials to really offer your monetization of your APIs. And more on the analytics, so looking at reports, the total number of calls that are being made within a different given time frame, what's working, what isn't, what's popular, kind of giving you more flexibility to look at the trends of your APIs and how to design with that better customer experience for your API consumption. And lastly, more on the analytics in the cloud. We'll come back into the TIBCO Cloud Home under analytics capabilities, and let's look more closely at those sales orders for smart